Hello everyone, thanks for looking in. I'm Glenn Victor, and we're here today to discuss the benefits of recovery from alcohol or other substance addiction and how it benefits the individual. Today we're joined by various panel members, which I'll introduce to you in a moment, and we come to you in cooperation with and partnership with the Orange County Office for a Drug-Free Community, which was formed by County Chairman Mel Martinez at that time, and Chairman Richard Crotty has carried on the excellent work that the Office for a Drug-Free Community does. Office Coordinator Mr. Bob Pickrell has formed the Orange County Coalition for a Drug-Free Community, and that coalition consists of several different subcommittees, one of which is the Treatment Subcommittee. And that is the committee that our panel members are here from with us today. And we're joined, first of all, by Bridget Kelly, who is an adult counselor at the Center for Drug-Free Living. Thanks for being with us, Bridget.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by Charlene Sears-Tolbert, who is a program director with the Lisa Merlin House. Charlene, welcome. And also we're joined by Enrique Aponte, who is also a program director at Fresh Start Ministries. Thanks for being here with us as well, Enrique. I think a good way to start off our discussion here is to talk about one of the basic, I think, common sense advantages to recovery from alcohol or other drug addiction, and that would be the physical or health advantages. Bridget, would you like to talk on that topic to start us off?
Yes, the physical benefits happen first. You know, you'll notice a lot of changes in a physical well-being. Anything changes from the skin tone, from the smell of the body, from the energy level. Depending on how long a person's been using is going to determine how much wellness they will need, physically as well as the other areas of the illness.
Wow, and it's interesting you talk about something as you know, basic as the smell of a person's body, because that really, it kind of gets it down to the nitty-gritty of you know, what we're talking about, because if a person is suffering from substance abuse, it could be the odor of alcohol, or isn't it true that in some cases if a person has reached that level of addiction, maybe they're not even showering regularly, things along that line, which again can affect their skin tone, things along that line. It really gets that serious, right?
And a lot of things happen immediately. You know, the grooming, their grooming improves. You know, they start grooming themselves, taking care of their hair, their teeth. You know, they may start having regular doctor's appointments. You know, that's part of the physical recovery process, taking care of health issues that they put on the back burner when they were using. Their diet changes, you know, their sleep habit changes. You know, instead of sleeping all day, they actually get up like normal people and they go to sleep at night instead of being up all night. So their sleep pattern changes.
Now, Charlene, you bring a unique perspective to this, and of course we talked briefly before we started our panel here today that you bring the unique aspect of being involved in recovery yourself. Is that correct?
I am also a recovering woman. I've been in the recovery process for 16 years.
Okay, so you can speak personally to some of these health advantages we're talking about here then, right? You know what you're talking about.
Right.
Enrique, any input on that now as far as
Yes, absolutely so. It is no mystery that the body metabolized part of it through perspiration, and there's where the smell that she was talking about comes from. Those that have experienced living with an alcoholic, I mean, needless to say, you can smell them before you come in the room. And depending on the degree of dysfunctional at the moment, you have from those functional, speaking of alcoholism again, they still have a job, they still take showers and the whole deal. But then you have a very, very low level where now they don't have a job or they're homeless. It's quite common. And hygiene definitely takes a hit.
Yeah, and that's, again, like I use the phrase getting down to the nitty-gritty, but certainly there are lots of other health advantages as we talk about liver problems, kidney problems, respiratory problems, potential brain seizures with some of the chemicals that are out there today. We hear so much about different club drugs and those types of things. So we're talking about some of the basic stuff, but there's some very serious health issues that are out there as well.
It's a progression. You know, you're not going to notice the major health issues at the very beginning of the use. It starts with little things. And the progression, you can go from just having problems with your skin tone or from your bowel habits, from your sleep habits, to having liver disease, heart disease, lung disease. kidney dysfunction, blood pressure problems. It's progressive. You know, you start at one, the end of that may end in death.
And now we've been talking mainly in regards to a person's physical health, but certainly their psychological health is affected as well. I think we could all agree on that, right?
Right.
And
Also, as well as physical health, I do want to point out, because I think it's very important to understand, the moment you come into recovery, you lower your risk for contracting STDs and HIV, and because you stop practicing the high-risk behavior that's associated with using drugs and alcohol.
that's
that's very important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you point that out, because that is exactly right, Charlene. And we've all heard this before. For example, when a person starts to drink alcohol or use another substance, the very first thing affected is their judgment. And a person who ordinarily would never think of having unprotected sex now may go ahead and do that, and then, as you mentioned, STDs, HIV, the AIDS virus, that whole thing. And it could almost take us off in another direction, the benefits to society when a person begins to recover. But as we've discussed, that could be a whole nother panel, and we'll try to stick to the benefits to the individual today. But certainly it's so much more far-reaching as well. Let's talk a little bit now about some of the social advantages to the individual as it relates to recovering from substance abuse. The advantages in regards to perhaps their family, and then in the society, whether it be with their employer or other social relationships. Enrique, let me direct that to you. Again, from perhaps the perspective from yourself from the Fresh Ministries, how can that be an advantage to an individual in regards to their family relations?
Absolutely. Socially, just beginning with the fact that now the employee would have a person that is more committed and able to keep the job. Safety will become of the essence when a person, socially speaking, the person is now, upon recovering or being in the process to recovery, able to participate in community activities that they may have. The person begin to assist the community perhaps with their church of preference.
Yes.
Also, if there's children involved, is very important, because how many parents may miss a school meeting because they're not now socially able to participate.
Yes.
And they may not even feel fit to participate, or the priorities become shift, and now the social arena is no longer a priority. So the person becomes functional, is what we like to call it again, and begin to participate in activities that, as a productive member of society, it's our responsibility to become involved with.
Sure, a responsible, productive member of society. What's interesting, too, is when we hear about things in regards to domestic situations, domestic violence, domestic abuse, and that could be verbal and or physical abuse, isn't it true that a very large percentage of, for example, domestic beatings, and even when we hear about things like, unfortunately, stabbings, homicides, this is very unusual to happen between people that don't know each other. It's most often between people who do know each other, and most often one or the other is under the influence of either alcohol or some other type of drug. Is that correct?
Yes, you can almost every time follow back to an abuse of alcohol or any other drugs, whether it's active or whether it has been. But everybody catches some of this wrath, and the children, isn't just the way that it happens. They are the innocent bystanders, if we may say.
So to summarize, I think we would all agree that it most definitely, when we say recovery from substance abuse for the individual, will improve their relationships, both with family members and other social settings. Would you agree with that, Charlene? Having a personal...
100% across the board, like Enrique was saying. Not only do we become productive members of society, the very same society that we may have been robbing in, stealing in, been deviant in. We stop practicing those deviant behaviors. We're no longer going into the Kmarts or the Walmarts in our community, stealing things that we're not paying for. We're actually giving back to the community. We may be helping out at an agency, doing volunteer work, doing service work in our community, you know, being parents to our children, being daughters to our parents, you know, our sons to our
Isn't
parents.
it true, too, that with volunteer work, we do it to help out that particular agency or individual, but even with my own involvement with volunteer work, I sometimes feel like I'm getting a whole lot more out of it than the agency I'm volunteering for.
One of the premises of recovery that we learn in the recovery process and that we teach as professionals is that the only way to keep what we have is to give it away. And that means sharing the gifts that we've been given with other people. So, you know, a big piece of the recovery process is doing service work and giving back to our communities. And whatever way that is, you know, there's a number of ways we can give back to our communities.
And Bridget, from your perspective, I would imagine that this is something you discuss as well when you meet with people as an adult counselor and talk to them about what the advantages for them are as it relates to going into recovery.
We discuss that with them, but they have to see that. It's like you take them through one step at a time. At the beginning, all they know is that they don't feel good. They're angry, they're miserable, they're critical, their life is a mess. And it takes some time for them to sort that out and even understand that themselves, that the drugs and the alcohol helped those situations become the way that they are. Taking it away doesn't automatically change that. It's a process that changes after a period of time as they stay in recovery rather than just being sober, just being clean and sober, but actually moving into recovery where you start feeling as if your life is changing. You get some control in your emotions. You're not going off and having problems at home and screaming and hollering and crying or locking yourself in your room or not coming home. Those things do begin to change, which changes every person around them.
And I would imagine that's something perhaps you like to stress when meeting with individuals, that when you have those tough times, because let's face it, we all know that recovery from drug addiction is not an easy thing for a person to go through. And when those times of perhaps temptation come up, it would be a good thing, you would think, for a person to think about, well, now they did tell me that my relations will improve with both my family and my relations with employers or society, and as a motivator to help through those tough times. Could you speak to that, Charlene? Would you find that to be true?
Yes, you know, and we have to be real clear with our clients, and also, you know, as a recovering woman, that just like Bridget said, it's a process, that this is a process that we're in. Recovery is not an event. It is something that we have to continue to work at. It is an uphill battle, and just like anything moving uphill, as long as there is a momentum behind it, it will continue to move upwards. So we have to continue to stay in the process, continue to work on our relationships. Just because I came into recovery and all of a sudden I want to be a good daughter, or I want to be a good sister or parent, if I would have had children at that time, doesn't mean that my mother or my siblings are open to that process as well. Because when you're talking about relationships, you're talking about other people that may have been affected by my addiction. So we have to mend those relationships. We have to make amends. We have to heal those relationships, and that can take time. We can't just say, you know, I've been clean for 60 days or I've been clean for 6 months, forgive me. You know, they may need to see some consistency in our behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, keeping in mind that, you know, the purpose of our panel and our forum here today is hopefully to perhaps reach an individual that may be looking in and thinking to themselves, well, you know, maybe I do have a problem with substance abuse, and you know, what would be some of the advantages for me if I did decide to begin working on getting clean, that type of thing. And those are the types of things that you know, we want to discuss here today. And I think all of you, again, have shed some light on some interesting areas. Let's talk a little bit now about some of the financial advantages, because we do hear, you know, from people who go into recovery that, in fact, sometimes one of the motivators for them to even pursue that avenue is that they became financially bankrupt or were just completely out of money, spent everything on, you know, using drugs, and now that they've begun to work on staying clean, there certainly are some financial advantages. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely so. Absolutely so. As a matter of fact, we are supposed to have a hierarchy of priorities. Upon the the abuse of alcohol or drugs, that changes. It changes dramatically as it progresses.
Sure.
The individual begin to spend all time and energy into acquiring their high of choice, if I may say, alcohol or drugs of any type. And then it moves into the concept of abusing it. That takes money. That takes time and energy. That it should be directed to more productive things. And that alone begins to deteriorate the whole spectrum, back even to the social spectrum. And the sense of not belonging sets in. And the sense of not needing to seek help sets in. And economically, the individual stop paying bills because they need the money for the drug of choice.
Sure.
And
The bills, I once heard it described, someone complained about having a phone bill, and someone who was in recovery from drug addiction said, well, you need to be thankful for even having that phone bill, because
right.
when they were using drugs, they couldn't even afford to have a
right,
phone.
right,
So
right.
it was an interesting way to describe that, an
Right,
interesting perspective on
yeah,
that.
it's an important factor when the individual is very, very wrapped up into their addiction of choice. They have the tendency to think that the bills are going to go away. You know, the child support, the utilities, groceries, car payments, insurance. There's a big spectrum. And then most cases, more is added onto it if the individual begin to violate the laws. And
Yeah.
there's a cost involved in that as well. And the health issue brings about a cost.
Yes.
You know, what the community will have to do, the society will have to do to support this individual if he comes to the point that now he's needing indigent help because he's going to that point. So the economic spectrum is just immense. It affects, last but not least, is if the individual is not working, he won't pay taxes. That's the core of it all. And, you know.
And as we talk about the financial perspective, certainly that could include legal ramifications. If, for example, someone was cited for a DUI, that can become very expensive if they were behind the wheel. Charlene, could you speak, for example, about maybe perhaps some of your own personal experience and
Sure.
how your finances were affected before you got into recovery and after?
The newfound clarity that we get in recovery provides us an opportunity to begin to prioritize. And I know that in my addiction, I was not financially independent. Even though I had a job for most of my addiction, I managed to keep a job. My monies at my job was used to buy whatever I wanted to buy, drugs, clothes, whatever. I was very irresponsible. I was not financially responsible because I wasn't financially independent. I depended on other people to make sure the rent got paid, to make sure the lights got paid, to make sure things were taken care of that needed to be taken care of. I did not take that responsibility myself. Coming into recovery, part of the recovery process teaches you to become responsible for yourself. It is much more rewarding in the recovery process to take care of yourself because you feel a sense of completion. You know, it helps to build your self-esteem. It helps you to feel good about yourself. My first apartment in recovery did not compare to the nice big home I lived in my addiction, but I wasn't responsible for that home. I wasn't paying the bills. So when I was able to get a small, tiny apartment in recovery, I felt good about myself.
That meant more to you
It
than...
meant more to me than the house, the brand new cars that I had. And my addiction, that didn't mean anything to me because I didn't work for it, I didn't earn it, I didn't make it happen. Recovery gives you that feeling of doing it yourself, and that's a very good feeling to have. You feel good about yourself.
Wow, that's excellent input. Now, Bridget, as an adult counselor with the Center for Drug-Free Living, do we find that a lot of clients that you may meet with do come into recovery or their attempts at recovery financially bankrupt? Is the finances a big motivator for people?
My experience is health is not usually the motivator. Mental health might be. They may be emotionally bankrupt and unable to manage their feelings, whatever those feelings are. But primarily they come into recovery because they have lost enough, they have enough pain, or enough problems causing them pain, and most of it comes down to financial. They are either not managing their money, they don't have the money anymore, they don't have their belongings anymore. Where I work, I see a lot of people who have nothing. any longer.
Sure.
You know, that's also a progression of it, where somebody, it might get my attention to have lost a car. But it might take losing a car, a life, and living in the woods for a period of time to get somebody else's attention.
I once heard it described, someone who lost everything said they went from Park Place to Park Bench. And that was an interesting way to describe that.
Not everybody does
but,
that.
Yeah.
But as it progresses, that's where it leads to. You will lose more and more based on financial and emotional instabilities.
And if that is the motivator, there's certainly nothing wrong with that, because the other advantages we've been talking about come along with that, right?
Right.
And I just want to say it's very easy, and I've watched it happen to a lot of other people in the process. It's very easy to regain material things in the recovery process. You know, I have to say addicts are probably the most resourceful people on the planet. And we've used that in a negative way. I mean, we always found ways to get our drugs of choice. We always found ways to get what was important to us in that moment. So when we come into recovery and we begin to shift that energy, you know, I find addicts, you know, I was a high school dropout. I have a master's degree today.
Wow.
You know, so, you know, and I've been able to move up in jobs and to, you know, to go after things that I want because we have the intelligence and we have the creativity. We're very creative and we are very resourceful. So a lot of times, you know, a lot of people are attracted to the recovery process because they see people in recovery. You know, they have cars and they dress nice and they have nice homes.
Sure. But that is an interesting observation because, of course, once a person gets into recovery, it's not just about accumulating material things.
Absolutely.
It's really about, as we talk about the psychological angle of this, the feeling good about their lot in life and where they're at. And talking about, again, the psychological aspect of this all. You know, for example, with yourself, Enrique, what are some of the benefits, again, for the individual from the psychological perspective of how will that affect that person's self-esteem, for example? Someone's going to feel better about themselves by staying.
Yes, I would love to touch on that subject, and I would like to tie it right up with the financial part before I go. And I'd like to mention the concept for the benefit of the viewers of the functional user, alcoholic or drug addict, and the dysfunctional. And it's important that this is understood because some people feel that because they still holding a job or they still have parents to
They're
support
not that bad
they're
yet,
not that
right?
bad.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of time. And that's important. Again, like I said, it's for the benefit of the viewers that they understand that concept.
You don't have to go from Park Place to Park Bench.
Absolutely not.
If I can, I've heard it described another way that everyone has to reach their own bottom. So
That is correct. That is correct. Their moment of awareness has got to be different for everybody. You know, spiritually speaking, all of us have to live with ourselves. And when we decide, get motivated to move forward, it is from ourselves that will spring. And a person that knows that has these problems and that financially is bankrupt and physically is not as fit as it should be because of their own choices, self-esteem the self-esteem just take a big hit. I mean, we feel not worthy anymore. Hope goes out the window. And these are forms of lies that we begin to believe of ourselves. And especially even more if somebody else has pointed it out to us in a negative manner. You know, we get in trouble, we end up in the judicial system, and now you're labeled a criminal of any type. And all of that begins to work on the individual self-worth and self-esteem. And that is an area that is most important to be rebuilt, strengthened. Hope needs to be given in order for this individual to be fueled again, just to get going, just to have an incentive that they are people, that they are members of the community, that there's a responsibility to be productive, to provide. And so the self-esteem is very important, and hope has a lot to do with that.
Yes, and it's interesting, again, the way we discussed it, that every person has to decide what their own bottom is. And some of the feedback that we've gotten is it's difficult for some individuals who are abusing alcohol or other drugs to come to a realization that they are either an addict or an alcoholic, and that can be the big stumbling block for them. But perhaps, Bridget, you could talk on this. It's not absolutely necessary for someone to to say to themselves, well, I'm an addict or an alcoholic, before they begin to pursue some type of recovery. Someone may decide for themselves that, well, they're using a little bit too often, or they're starting to form some type of a habit maybe they're not comfortable with, and maybe they want to do something to try to put it in check before they get to the point where they think within themselves that they may be an addict or an alcoholic. Would that
We all enter that stage of recovery there. We're all at that, somebody started at that stage.
Now, Bridget, if I could direct the next question to you, it's not absolutely necessary for a person who may think that they have a problem with alcohol or other drugs to come to some type of realization within themselves that they're either an addict or an alcoholic. It may be something where they may think they're just using a little bit too much and it's beginning to affect their life. That can sometimes be a stumbling block, wouldn't you agree?
It might be a stumbling block, but that's where we begin. Everyone has to begin at that stage where is it a problem? Is it a coincidence? What is going on here? You understand that you have problems. Are they related because I'm using drugs and alcohol? Is it because I can't stop? And that's the first stage that we go through.
Yeah,
it's
we've talked about some of the negative effects, but I guess what we're saying is it doesn't have to get that bad, right?
No. If a person is in pain because they're using, they've lost something that they appreciate, and it might be something that another person doesn't even appreciate, but if you've lost it and you relate it to substance use, and you think that that might make a difference in your life, you begin at that point. You don't have to lose everything.
That's
Not
right.
everybody loses it all.
I've heard it described once, and maybe some of you have heard this, insanity is repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results, right?
Absolutely.
Or
Right.
if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting,
That's
right?
right.
So again, it doesn't have to reach, some of the bottoms we've
Right.
described here. Now, we have talked about some of the negative things, but let's talk about some more of the positive advantages to an individual, because we've heard people say sometimes, well, I've been using all my life. I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I quit using. How am I going to have any fun? Now, Charlene, if I may, for example, some of our understanding with the 12-step programs, there's things like, of course, the meetings, and then there's picnics and dances and conventions. There's a lot of things to do in recovery that actually are a lot of fun, right?
I have a great time. I am never bored. I was bored in my addiction because, I lived in the same 1 mile, radius going back and forth. But today, my life is wonderful. I travel. I went to Jamaica in June. I'm going to the Bahamas next month. I travel all over this country. I attend conventions. I attend 12-step conventions, or I travel out to California to visit my brother. I can do those things today. I enjoy life with my son. I go to the movies, to Disney World, to Universal. I attend athletic events, basketball, soccer games. My life is so full, and it is so much fun today. Like, I couldn't imagine this life in my addiction because, my addiction was so limited. So, of course, in your addiction, you think, well, I can't have fun without drugs, because you use drugs to create an illusion of fun.
Yeah.
Today, I really have fun. Like, I enjoy every moment of my life. Like, Christmas is very special. Like, I'm able to feel what it feels like when I watch my son open his gifts. Like, that's life. That's truly living. There is so much to do, and it's a ton of fun.
It's interesting the way you described it. You're able to feel that now, and isn't it true what we hear, that when a person uses alcohol or other drugs, what it does is it numbs their emotions, and they never really do experience those true feelings like what you described, for example, at a holiday watching a child open a gift.
And just to give you a quick example, a couple of months ago when I was in Jamaica, I was at an all-exclusive resort where all the alcohol you could get was free. And I watched so many people just consume drink after drink after drink and become a prisoner of the bar. They couldn't detach themselves from that bar. Meanwhile, I'm on the beach, I'm enjoying the smells, the taste of the food, the people. I'm living life sober, having a great time. And here are these people, they're not sober, they're in Jamaica, but they couldn't leave the bar.
And we've heard it described that way as well with users of illegal drugs, for example, who create this prison for themselves. Now, you mentioned that you travel across the country, and we've heard people say, well, I couldn't leave the neighborhood because I wouldn't know where to go to get.
Right.
Although then we've heard others say, well, they always find a place to go, but people do become prisoners of their own minds, actually, is a way to say it. But certainly, there's a lot of ways to have fun in recovery. Now, Bridget, I would imagine that you probably get that type of feedback sometimes, too, from those seeking recovery, say, well, I don't know what to do with myself anymore. I don't know how to have any fun.
The fear of what's life going to be like, the fear of facing things, the fear of making decisions in the future. But it takes other people, recovering people around them, that show them and demonstrate to them that they are promised. They are promised in recovery certain things, and one of them is happiness. One of them is an increase in their feeling of self-worth or of self-esteem, both of those things. And families and jobs and opportunities, those things are promised.
And I would think as well, another one of the good things would be new friendships. As you begin to meet people, whether it be through meetings or whatever, some of the types of things we discussed, there's got to be a bond there that unless you're part of that, that particular segment of our society or that particular group, that no one else could possibly understand. And that's got to be a really good feeling for two people who are, whether it be talking together, working together, whatever it is, to have that understanding between themselves. Could you speak on that, Charlene?
Yes, because in recovery, you're able to develop real friendships. They're not superficial. In our addiction, there's always like a veil of shame and guilt and secrecy. We don't really want to let people see who we are. So we're always like not truly being open to relationships. In the recovery process, you don't have that anymore. So you are able to connect in a deep level and you build lasting bonds. I mean, I have friendships now. If I don't speak to someone, a couple of years could pass and I could see them, and there's that spiritual connection that you make in this process because now you have an honest relationships.
And when I think of those types of friendships and bonds, you would think it would be such a strong bond because, let's face it, when we boil it down to the nitty-gritty again, we're talking about a life and death situation here, right?
Yes.
And in those types of friendships, really, you're just trying to help each other stay alive,
That's right.
Now, you mentioned the spiritual aspect of this, again, Charlene, and Enrique, if I may, direct our next question to you. As we talk about the advantages and having fun in recovery, that type of thing, certainly from the spiritual angle of this, there's a lot of opportunity to have fun and begin to feel good about yourself again from that perspective too. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to begin from where when you brought into the conversation the 12 steps of recovery, which anyone that has any contact with someone in recovery will know about that. They were founded by a gentleman by the name of Bill W. And the 12 steps are a biblically based concept. They're a spiritual concept of recovery, without a doubt, and that's how he started it. And even the nation itself is founded in a base of principles and morals, and is probably the glue that keeps things together and in order.
I've heard the 12 steps described as a plan for living.
Well, absolutely
Would you agree
so.
with that? Yeah. Good orderly directions. So
Yeah.
Good orderly direction, which is, if you were to write the acronym, is G-O-D, and it's God. And I even heard people that says that they're not believers in any type of faith whatsoever. At the moment they're in trouble, we have this tendency to say, oh, God, help me.
Down in the trenches,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely so. So the spiritual aspect is very, very important. And coming from a faith-based background in recovery, it is the beginning, the foundation. Most people, the vast majority of society in this country has had some affiliation with the religious of choice. And there's where we get the whole, if I may say, the 10 Commandments, which are very famous, tells you about what not to do. And the benefits of that is that if you learn what not to do, life will be a lot better.
The rest kind of falls in order,
It
the
falls
natural
right into
order
place.
of things.
Absolutely
Now, it's interesting
so.
because, you know, we've also heard that, as you said, for most people, there's some type of, what we could even call just a basic religious foundation, whatever that religion of their
Yes.
choice might be, whether it be as a child in childhood. But And maybe you could speak on this, Charlene, too. What we hear from a lot of people who have gotten involved with alcohol or other drugs, that kind of goes out the window as the usage or addiction progresses, that type of thing. And by entering recovery and beginning to stay clean and or sober, now all of a sudden they can begin to look at that again and see where it might benefit them in their life, make them feel good about themselves and their place in society, and that type of thing. Did you find that was the case for you at all, Charlene?
Absolutely. And also, you know, it's been said that addiction is such a cunning enemy of life. And when we come into the recovery process, because my addiction was very, very powerful and very controlling, I became powerless as a result of my addiction. So it was very important for me when I came into the recovery process to begin to develop a relationship with a power greater than myself to help me in my process, because I realized in my addiction that I could not do this by myself. I needed to tap into a source. And for me, that source was God. I needed to tap into God, and I needed to connect with God to help me to continue to overcome my addiction.
And isn't it true, and maybe you could speak on this a little bit, Bridget, that for a lot of people who are wanting to seek out recovery, that scares them. As soon as they hear that word or that whole thing, and it's kind of like even for the purpose of our show today, we're not here to get religious on anyone or anything, but what we found is for most people who are successful in efforts to recover do begin to develop some type of a working relationship on a spiritual level in their life again. Is this a stumbling block you find for a lot of people, Bridget?
I feel it's a stumbling block after they begin the process. At the very beginning, it's important that they understand they need something. But as they begin to get things back, that's where the stumbling block comes in. Should I actually turn my life and my will over to the care of somebody else, or am I really doing okay on my own? So and recovery will take you past those steps in recognizing what those needs are. Most people come to that.
And I would think at the very least, once you take the drugs away, you know, and they're out of the picture now, a person can now begin to think with a clear mind, and then at that point begin to make their own decisions with good judgment on what their spiritual, religious choices may be. Kind of hard, I would imagine, to make those choices without a clear mind, and I think perhaps maybe that's how come it ends up out the window sometimes. Is that right, Shirley?
Right, and one of the things that I found in the process of recovery is usually we have to take care of that other stuff first, because it kind of prepares that place, if you will, to be able to make that spiritual connection. You know, we got to clean up the mess. You know, we got to take care of our bodies. We got to begin to reconnect to society, and what we're doing in that process is we're preparing the way. We're making the space a nurturing environment for the spirit to begin to thrive, because we are spiritual beings, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, you know, and that's not so much speaking about religion, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So it's important to be able to connect with that inner voice inside of all of us, because we all have that voice.
Sure. And once a person does, again, begin the recovery process and perhaps makes that choice to begin working on spiritual things in their life, what types of, what we'll say, opportunities, Enrique, are there for a person to have some fun and say, hey, I went through all this, and you know, I've got this part of my life behind me, hopefully, and I'm back on track. But again, it comes that thing, well, what am I going to do with myself? I know with the ministries, there's always something going on.
Yes,
right?
I get that question all the time. And one of the things that the individual would get once the head is clear up and they have a direction to go to is just that. For example, speaking again of faith-based and ministries, that alone, that community of choice, and whatever your religion of choice may be, there's always something going on, like you said. There's always activities and clean and wholesome activities going on, and there's a number of publications out there that have the location and the times where these things are taking place, and it's a whole society. As a matter of fact, the majority of society do productive and clean and wholesome things, you know, and not the opposite as we seem to believe.
Well, you know, that's an interesting observation, I think, Enrique, because we hear from people who are using or get caught up in addiction, where they say, well, everybody I know is doing it, everybody else is doing it, when the fact of the matter is most people aren't.
No, and I can add to that. reason why the person involved in the dysfunctional, the maladaptive behavior feels that way is because, as the old saying goes, that birds of the same feather flock together. And if you are in active addiction or you're moving on to addiction, who are you going to hang out with?
That's right.
Except those that are partaking in your same choice at the moment. So that's why. And the addict actually loses the focus of the reality. The reality is the majority of people have jobs and have fun and have families and are doing what they're supposed to do. And the faith-based concept in here is important. One of the best benefits of this circle in the faith-based concept is perhaps that you have accountability. And people would see you, and if you begin to listen to people when somebody tells you something's going wrong with you, instead of ignoring it and acknowledge it, it might make a difference of the progression of the disease. Sometimes it doesn't have to reach the worst point simply because most of my experience, somebody already see you going in a certain direction and behaving in a certain manner that you're not aware of.
Yes.
And people have the tendency to point it out to you, and we have the tendency to say, oh, no, I'm okay.
I can even say for myself, Enrique, once someone told me, Glenn, if somebody says something to you about the way you're behaving, take it with a grain of salt. If two people say something to you about the way you're behaving, you may want to raise an eyebrow. If three people say something to you about the way you're behaving, probably want to take another look at that, because those outside of us are who know us best, right? And it's interesting you talk about, you know, confiding in someone or someone pointing out something to you. And Bridget, if I could direct this next question to you, I think, you know, based on a lot of the feedback that we get, that one of the big stumbling blocks for a lot of people as they begin to consider seeking recovery is that, oh, someone's going to think I'm crazy, or this concept of having to seek out help. Well, I can handle it myself, and people have been described as that they stuff a lot of things, that type of thing. And the thought of meeting with that therapist is some type of stumbling block. And another way that we've thought might be positive to look at it for someone considering that can't get past that is looking at a person like yourself, an adult counselor, because that's a word that bugs some people, is as a mentor, which is, if I'm hearing you correct, Enrique, kind of what you were talking about. You know, we all like to draw on the wisdom and the experience of someone who's gone before us, perhaps, or may be more knowledgeable in a particular area. So that's something that I would think, you know, if a person who may be considering recovery could kind of look at it that way, just getting some good input from a person like yourself.
By the time they come in, the most common thing that you'll say is, I'm just tired. I'm just tired. They don't have any other way to express that they are so tired of what is going on. And then they begin to open up. They have to begin to trust somebody.
Sure.
And generally, it's going to be a professional. It will either be in the clergy, the church, or a professional of some kind. Getting to that point is really positive. You know, I need help.
That's a sign of strength, is the way I've heard it described, not a sign of weakness to reach out for help. And, you know, it really is interesting that is a stumbling block, and not necessarily for all people. Now, Charlene, maybe you could speak on this. We've heard it described that it's easier to stay clean than it was to get clean. Now, again, that may not be the case with every person, but what's your feeling on that?
I think that fluctuates sometimes. I think sometimes it's easier to stop, but it's harder to stay stopped. So you need support in the stay and stop part, you know, and that's where the recovery process come in, and that's where the whole idea of mentors, you know, needing someone that you can talk to, someone that you can share honestly.
For example, in the 12-step programs, it's described as a sponsor, right? Okay.
And the sponsor's role is basically a mentor, and usually it's you can identify with, that you see something positive in them that you would like to have in yourself. So really, you know, it's just, you know, being able to talk to someone, to be guided through the process. Someone can say, oh, well, I had that situation in my life, and this is what I did to overcome. It's really just sharing, your experiences, your strengths, and your hope with another person. It's not so much about, you know, beating people down and telling them you need to do this. It's about getting suggestions and getting guidance in this process.
That's an excellent way to describe it. Good guidance and a support system, basically. And I think, again, because we are about to wrap up now, that's a good way to round out our discussion is, you know, if there is someone who's watching today, by all means, please, if you'd like more information, call the number that we've had on the screen to seek out more information. Form a support system for yourself, and again, begin to enjoy some of the fun and the things that we've talked about here today. Want to thank our panel members once again. We have Bridget Kelly here from the Center for Drug-Free Living, and of course Charlene Sears Tolbert, who's here from the Lisa Merlin House, and then we also have, I'm cheating here, looking at my notes here, Enrique Aponte from the Fresh Ministries. Thank you all very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.